Imagine this. You have no sailing experience whatsoever. Yet you've got the crazy idea to quit your job and leave life behind to get on a boat and learn how to sail. You're not someone who does this sort of thing. For some reason, though, this is the only idea that makes sense to you right now. So you start making a plan. This was Judy Lynn 15 years ago. Despite a successful career in strategic planning at Turner Broadcasting in Atlanta, she felt like she was on a corporate conveyor belt. She left that job to crew on a boat with two strangers, a journey that eventually stretched to 12 months. Today, Judy lives in the Bay Area with her husband and two young sons. She recently started a new position as Chief Operating Officer with the nonprofit Nature Bridge. Here's why I'm especially excited to share this story with you. 1, I love stories of people stepping out of their comfort zones to go on an adventure. 2, when I was planning my own sabbatical, I also wanted to go sailing, and I had no experience. And in the end, I didn't really have the guts or follow through on all the logistics to get on a boat with a couple of strangers and cross the open ocean, which is really what I wanted to do. So I really appreciate Judy's methodical approach to facing down her fears and creating a plan for herself. Here's the other thing that I think is special about Judy's story is that she's got perspective. This sabbatical took place years ago, and she's now able to speak to how it's changed her life, the people in her life, as well as her perception of herself. And she's gone on to have a successful career despite taking this detour. So she can kind of speak to how she made sense of that, how she explained it to others, and the impact that ultimately had on her. If you've had an adventurous idea that you would love to go after and take a break from your own career to go do, I hope that Judy's story provides you with some inspiration as well as some practical approaches for how to go about it. I'm Lisa Hawashi, and this is Leap Like Me, the show about the leaps people take to make the most of this amazing life. Judy, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me.
I've been really excited to talk to you about your sabbatical because you spent it sailing, which was actually an ambition that I had for my own sabbatical that I didn't get to. So it remains one of those fantasies. And I wanted to ask you, where did that idea come from for you?
Most people find it fairly surprising that I'm not a sailor. I never did it as a child. I was never introduced to it anywhere through school. I had it in my head after I'd gone to camp that it was something that I enjoyed, but I never actually did it. And so the funny story is that I was having a pretty hard time at work, really stressed out. And I had been watching television one night and Dawson's Creek was on, and the ending scene was a sailboat sailing off into the sunset. And that triggered a feeling in me that I felt like I wanted either the adventure or the peacefulness or even just the serenity of sailing. And so that was sort of the image in my head that kind of launched this whole idea in my head of both having time to do a sabbatical, but then actually choosing to do sailing as part of that trip.
And what was going on in life that made it so alluring to you?
I think that's also an interesting part of my story is that nothing was going wrong, but nothing felt really right. I was working really hard. I was doing really well in my career. I was generally content, had good friends, but I just kind of felt the really strong pull of inertia. And I felt like for me, at least at the time, I wanted to get re-inspired and I didn't know how. And I guess the sailing part of it was the trigger. And then the drastic move to do a sabbatical was kind of the solution that worked for me.
And how old were you at this time?
I was 32.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, what was it like between sort of that moment of watching Dawson's Creek to the actual quitting your job and putting all this into place? What was the time span and what went into that?
Yeah, I think it was probably 6 to 8 months total. One thing about me being a business person and sort of a type A personality is that once I have something in my head, the brain just starts blurring on the ways to make it happen. And obviously starting with an idea that was completely out of my norm in terms of knowledge and expertise, but also awareness of what was the world like. I just started doing research, and it started with Google searches that were about sailing classes, about sailing trips. And what I found as I was going through the process was that I could kind of pick how I wanted sailing to represent itself. And it wasn't a sabbatical at the time. It was just the idea of sailing. And as I dug deeper into kind of what was available, what I knew I didn't want to do was just go for a week and take a sailing class, or even go on a big vacation, even if it was for more than 1 week. I really wanted something to be life-changing. And so as I sort of went down that rabbit hole of what that looks like in the sailing world, I kind of ended up in a place where you could jump on a boat and live a life of just traveling on a sailboat as opposed to on a train or a plane or anything else. And that at the time was really appealing to me.
So I think that's really interesting that you really had this intention, it sounds like, as you were looking at options for it to be life-changing. What were the elements that you kind of landed on that would kind of take you in that direction?
Yeah. And I don't think at the time sabbaticals, at least in my world or consciousness, was something that was either talked about or even known. And so now that I look back on it 15 years later, the word sabbatical fits it really well. But at the time, it just felt like I needed a break. And I didn't know at the time what the break was going to be. I think in my head, I thought the break was going to be 3 months because that was long enough where it wasn't a vacation, but it was short enough where I could kind of go back and have a life that I had before without too much disruption. And so I kind of settled into this break as being a 3-month time off from my life in which I'd do something very different from my normal, something that I've always wanted to do, whether I knew it or not. And what I found is that when I was on my break, more time was actually adding value, having the time off. And so it just got extended to being over a year long, even though I planned in my head for only to be a short amount of time.
And what were some of well, let's start first maybe with some of the logistical challenges of putting this plan into place.
Yeah, I think that it was the who, what, where, when, how. So how was I going to do it? And again, when I stumbled upon some websites, which now are totally normal, but at the time I thought were kind of odd, was matching boats and crews and the ways and different avenues that someone like me could take, especially since I wasn't a professional sailor, I didn't have experience doing it. Being able to find the right boat was a big deal. And so I did a lot of research and looked around, and there were professional boats looking for professional crew. There were kind of more backpacker type boats, just picking up anyone along the way who could pay. And there was everything in between. And so finding the right boat that I felt was a fit was a big part. And so luckily I found a boat. It was a French boat sailing from France to New Zealand, 2 young guys who were also kind of on a sabbatical from their careers on an adventure. So once I figured out that that could be a possibility and that we would be a match, everything kind of fell into place there. Because once I found the boat, I felt comfortable committing to the idea of the trip, which involved at that point a one-way plane ticket to somewhere at some point in time in the future, because the boat had not left France yet. And then as the starting point, that being kind of my deadline date, I could back up, again, being a planner that I am, back up from there and really decide what other things had to go into place, like quitting my job or selling my car, putting everything in storage and giving up my apartment and life in Atlanta, which is where I was at the time.
And how did you handle the money question?
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing is that the way that the sailing part of it worked is that you pay a day rate to the captain, and that covers boat maintenance, food for the most part, and some of the administrative costs. And so I kind of knew what I needed to do for, again, in my head, 3 months. And so I did the math, had enough in savings. And then by the time I sold my car, which I knew I wouldn't need, I had this pot of money to go forward with. And again, I don't think if I hadn't had that initial pot to get going, I would have done it comfortably because I had no other means from which to like make it happen. But knowing that that was at least the foundation I had, then I could actually calculate in my head at every month further after that, like, do I have enough to go on for another month? And sort of create a budget in my head, if not on paper, as to what I could actually do within the time that I had.
So just to get into the really more technical weeds here, just for people who are really interested in doing a similar type of thing. So to crew on a boat with no experience, you have to pay a day rate.
Yeah.
And what is that generally?
At the time, again, this was 15 years ago, I think it was 25 euros a day. And that covered any kind of boat maintenance costs, any of the docking fees, things that were related to kind of the boat itself. But if I wanted to go buy a beverage or have lunch that wasn't on the boat, or do anything else that would be kind of my own spending money. And obviously getting there and getting my passport ready and, any gear or clothing that I needed for the trip.
And what was the process like of you actually kind of getting to know who you would be on the boat with? Because I remember I did look at some of those websites for crewing, and I remember thinking, how am I going to figure out that these people are cool to be with if we're going into the open ocean? It's like a very intense situation.
Yeah. So funnily enough, I went into this so ignorantly, and I don't mean ignorant, probably more naive. I didn't know. And so when I found this boat, and again, 15 years ago, technology was very different from now. It was an email that then became hey, let's talk more on email and answer some questions to let's send some photos back and forth. So I actually never saw them in person until I stepped off the boat in a foreign country on an island somewhere.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was a leap of faith. They seemed like they were just like me. And so searching for the same thing. So it wasn't a salty sailor looking for female crew. It wasn't a professional person looking for a cook. It was definitely sort of like, we need interesting people to join us on our adventure. And that was the vibe that I wanted. Mm-hmm. And I was lucky to find it. And I think the second part of it was I picked a place where I knew that nothing was more than 10 miles away from the next place. And so if it was great, awesome. But if it wasn't good, I could jump off and come home. Like in my back of my head, I knew that there was a release valve in the whole thing that was safe and comfortable for me. So if we're meeting in the Caribbean, the next island would never be more than 10 minutes away or by a plane or 10 hours away by a boat. So that if it didn't work out, I wasn't going to get stuck with them for longer than whatever time period.
Gotcha. So part of your safety plan was choosing a departure point that would be kind of near civilization for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. I am kind of imagining you like going home from work and doing research and, this is like your side of obsession for a while. When did you start kind of cluing in your friends and parents about it, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think I probably got 50 to 75% through a plan in my head and potentially on paper in terms of dates and what it would look like and how it would work before I actually said the words out loud, because I felt like if I said it out loud, then I set this intent and then I had to follow through and I couldn't kind of back off. But I tested it with my sister, who I'm close with, a couple of close friends. I saved my mom and dad for later because the immediate questions that would come to them mind would be to kind of look at the risk of it and potentially talk me out of it. And what I found is that when I started saying out loud, it was very out of character for me at the time. They didn't actually know what I was trying to do or why I was doing it. Because again, from the outside, everything was great. I had a great job. I had a great life. Why would I go off and quit that to go do something else? But as I was testing it, I got a lot of that's so cool. I wish I could do that. Wow, you're so brave. And all the words that I wanted to hear about my life. And so I got braver and braver with the idea. And then again, being a planner, as soon as I could get the pieces in line to actually be comfortable doing it, it was a little bit of a leap of faith to say it out loud, make the plan, and then actually follow through with it. And then I could kind of socialize it wider with my parents and different people, and then potentially people at work.
And how did you actually find yourself explaining it? Do you remember?
Yeah, I think my parents were the first kind of barrier to the reality of it. And I remember talking to them about how I was feeling and how things were great, but they weren't going exactly how I wanted them to be. And I wanted to be re-energized and I wanted to take a break. And their first thoughts, especially about the sailing part, was, why are you going sailing and are you going to be safe? And then once I could talk them through that, well, what about your job and career? And I knew in my head at the time, for them, they wanted to know that I would not be too far off of the path that I was on coming back. And in my head, I was thinking, well, if I had to do something totally different and not get back on the conveyor belt that I felt like I was on, that would be okay too. And when I was comfortable saying that out loud to them and to my friends, then I knew I was ready to take the sabbatical time off. Because that was, for me at the time, a really big sort of challenge to overcome mentally, but also kind of externally.
Which part was really the challenge to overcome?
Being able to quit a really good job and be okay not being able to come back to that really good job after all was said and done.
Yeah. What seemed like at the root of that for you?
I think a little bit of confidence that I would be okay with whatever I could find coming back from the experience, and a little bit of confidence in why I was doing it and what I wanted to get out of it, that it would weave well into my kind of career story. And again, I'd gone to business school. I had had a good job, career, and done all the right things to the States. So nothing that I was doing in the sabbatical time off would take away from that and hopefully would add to it.
So that's kind of the way you were able to frame it for yourself.
Yeah, rationalize it, frame it, justify it, all those things.
But you are still going to be the same person with this added experience. Well, I guess, is there anything else you would want to add about what that sort of before the leap point was like?
I think an important part for me was coming up with the plan, not knowing after the fact that the plan wouldn't go as I intended to, and nothing really does when it comes to these sorts of experiences, but at least knowing that at the baseline, I knew what I would do if I went through with the plan. And so part of that was the budget, part of it was the plane ticket and logistics, part of it was knowing what gear I'd have to buy, part of it was knowing the sequence in which I'd have to quit the job, give up the apartment, put the stuff in storage, where I would put it, what I would do with my car. And so I think, again, for a planner, knowing at least I had a baseline plan and being confident and comfortable with it was the kind of emotional release and the mental release I needed to be able to actually start implementing the plan. I don't know that if I didn't have a budget for it or a plane ticket or a plan for what I would do with my apartment and the timing didn't sync up, that I would have been as comfortable just kind of letting it all go to the wind.
Mm-hmm. So providing that structure for yourself was really important for being able to do it.
Yeah.
And then what happened to that plan once you got out there?
Oh, gosh, it went out the window. Yeah. And I think that was one of the biggest learnings is that you can have a plan and you need to have a plan for yourself and for kind of the experience. But at the end of the day, the flexibility and the ability to control the path that you're on when new things present themselves was a huge takeaway, and knowing that it would turn out okay in the end. It wouldn't turn out the way you expected it to be, and that could be either worse or better, but it would be okay in the end because dynamics of people change. And so people that I thought I was going to be on the boat with for a long time left and others would join, or weather would send us in a different direction, or I'd get to juncture points where I thought we were going to do X, Y, Z, and we ended up doing something totally different. And so again, I think for me, the plan was a good kind of comfort zone, but the learning that really showed up was that things change and you need to be able to go with the flow a lot.
What was one of the most challenging growth points in your journey?
So I'd actually joined a different boat before my big trip just to test my sea legs. And I'd committed to sail with this boat for about 3 weeks from Vanuatu all the way to Australia. And when I got on the boat, everything that I'd hoped for it was exactly the opposite. It wasn't a safe boat for me. The captain and the people on the boat weren't people that I wanted to be around. And the trip to Australia from me at that point was pretty isolating and dangerous in terms of my skills and abilities. And so I made the choice at that point not to go with them, even though I'd committed to the idea of it. And that was a big trip because that was a big decision for me because I completely changed the trajectory of what I thought I was going to do. I let the boat leave without me, and I was in a country of Vanuatu without a plan, a plane ticket, or anything else. And so for me, owning that decision and being comfortable with why I was doing it and basically changing my mind, but being okay, because I think in normal cases, I would have just gone because I'd obliged myself to it. But really thinking about what I needed and wanted in the trip and being able to make that a reality was a huge growth opportunity that then allowed me to do other things like that more easily without not as much debate in my mind. I think in my previous world, I had tended to consider what others wanted ahead of my own needs and wants. And being on a trip by myself, single, being able to actually own my decisions for the reasons that I really wanted was a big growth point.
And in terms of sailing itself, what parts were totally different from what you expected?
I think I mentioned earlier a little bit of naivete and ignorance is bliss. I don't think I understood how dangerous it was or potentially dangerous it was and how much hard work it was. I think there's an image of sitting on a boat in white shorts and a t-shirt drinking a martini, and that was not the case. It was grueling. It was hot. It was dangerous. It was uncomfortable, but it was very adventurous. And I think learning to be capable at the actual technical parts of sailing the boat itself, but then also the teamwork concept really became a reality for me because I'd done teamwork on sports and we'd had teamwork at work, but really kind of life and death, life teamwork, I hadn't really experienced, especially in this sort of environment. And so that to me was a big part of the sailing experience that I didn't realize that there's a captain, there are a crew, everyone has a role, everything from night watch to who pulls up the anchor. I think those are the things that I really embraced as sort of part of a team.
So when you did get to your boat with the two French guys, it did turn out to be a good fit.
Yeah, it turned out to be a great fit. They are some of my dearest friends today. And I think, again, people that I never probably would have come across otherwise have kind of changed and impacted our lives directly and indirectly for kind of all the following years from that time together.
So an appeal for me with sailing is really to be out in the ocean. And I am curious to hear, what were some of the magical moments that you experienced being in the outdoors this way?
Yeah, I think a reliance on nature and appreciation for it. You know, with sailing, you rely on the wind and the weather and the waves to kind of get you where you're going. So I don't know that I'd really been that connected to nature in that way. So that was very sort of powerful for me. In terms of magical moments, there's so many. I think two come to mind. One is I was on a night watch one night. I think it was at 2 a.m. So pitch black darkness by myself on a boat in the middle of nowhere. And I hear noises, which normally freak me out because, again, noises in the dark on a boat by yourself, at least on watch, are not good. But as I looked around me, there were dolphins. And at the time, there was a lot of bioluminescent phosphorescence. And these dolphins were like torpedoes of green glowing light. First, I saw a couple, two or three, kind of playing around the boat, and I was completely in awe. But then I realized that there was a super pod of about 60 of them that were diving around the boat and playing for probably 10 minutes at most before they left me. But just the idea of the Matrix poster coming to life and these green, amazing creatures kind of hanging out with me in the middle of the night was so amazing. And then just moments of, on night watch by myself. But I remember there would be days where it was a full moon and it was so bright. It was like the sun that I could read books and write in my journal with the moonlight, which again is so contrary to what you actually think about nighttime and the moon. But that sort of amazing contrast, I think that you only really get on a boat in the middle of nowhere at nighttime when you're awake, was really, really powerful.
Incredible.
So another example would be also going to places that you wouldn't be able to get to unless you were on a sailboat. And I don't think I realized how many far-flung places there are, both in places like French Polynesia, but these really remote islands that are unbelievably beautiful and interesting and cultural that literally are in the middle of nowhere. Unless you were on a boat, you would not be able to see them. The Saguaro Islands in the Cook Islands is another place that people can stumble upon in a boat, but there's no way to get there otherwise.
And how many months were you on the boat all told?
12 months.
And how was it to decide to leave the boat and to go back to civilization? What was that whole process like?
Yeah. So after the initial 3 months, there was a natural decision point every month where my mother would call and say, "Hey, are you coming home?" And I would say, "No, I'm still having fun, not yet." And this kept going and going. And there would be like, I'd be poised to cross the Panama Canal. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to do that." Or poised to cross the Pacific Ocean, which could be up to a month. And I said, "No, I want to do that. When will I ever be presented with the opportunity of crossing the Pacific Ocean on a sailboat?" And so these were natural decision points on a regular basis. But in the sailing world, the weather and hurricane season comes into play and enters the equation. And what I realized is that while I could easily decide to do another month, once the hurricane season became a point where you had to dock the boat and leave and then come back and continue your trip, I felt like I'd accomplished what I wanted to do and what I wanted to see. And another month or 6 months or 10 months wouldn't have changed anything dramatically for me internally. And so at that point, I think I felt ready to kind of follow that natural course and go back to my life. And I was actually really ready to go work again.
What was that feeling like for you?
It was like a closing of a book a little bit, where I'd had the most amazing adventure, but I was so happy that I'd reached kind of the end of the book and that there was another chapter waiting because I'd gotten more than I'd ever imagined I could get out of the trip.
What do you think the biggest way that you had changed was?
I think for me, confidence confidence in my own skills, confidence in not having a plan and being able to be okay with it, ability to solve any problem that could come up. And then a confidence, kind of like the difference between choosing the life you want versus living the life that you happen to be on. And so again, accountability to myself to own those decisions and be very kind of purposeful and thoughtful about them.
And how was the readjustment back to life and finding a job and all of that?
Yeah, I think the biggest learning is that as much as my life that year and my perspective was broadened and changed, and I learned so much, I was kind of astounded at how quickly, what I learned is that I was still the same person I was before the trip. I'd definitely been changed, but at the core, I was still who I was. And so, if anything, coming back was actually very easy. I had to get used to 24-hour stores and the abundance of fresh water and washing my clothes by hand. And those are conveniences that I found supreme appreciation for that I don't think I had before. But being able to get on my laptop and update my resume or conversing with kind of work colleagues about jobs, it was not as scary and different as I thought I would be. And the interesting thing is I chose to go back to the exact career that I had before I left. And I thought maybe I'd come back and be a yoga instructor or go work, in a totally different industry and doing totally something different. And what I think it cemented for me who I was and what I wanted to do. But I had this renewed energy and inspiration for that choice that I don't think I had before, because it was now a choice and not something that I was feeling forced to do.
As you said, like sabbaticals weren't really a thing at that point. How did you explain the gap in your resume to employers?
I think the first questions that come up in most employers' minds are, why did you do it? And why are you coming back and applying for this job? And so I think before I left, I had a good idea of why I was doing it. I wasn't because I hated my job. It wasn't because I got fired. It wasn't because I was underperforming. It was because I was making a proactive choice to get re-inspired myself so that I could be better coming back. And I think having that in my mind and being able to verbalize it and then have examples to go back to of how that actually came to be through this experience was really impactful, and I think helped me weave the story better. I also think that it was a very unique and different thing that we could talk about that could show a little bit of my uniqueness, both in my career as to those who may or may not have done this within the same career path I was on, but also show different sides of my personality, that I'm willing to take risks, that I'm a really good problem solver, and that it's just different and interesting. I think was something that was also a good conversation part that made sense in the scheme of my life and then applying for the job. Like, would I be a more interesting person to work with because of this experience? And hopefully the answer was yes.
And how do you think this adventure has impacted who you are today and your career?
Personally, I think I have a greater appreciation for nature and the simplicity of life and what I actually need to be happy and live, I guess. And then on the career side, I think it goes back to the confidence. I think, again, because the experience was something that for me at the time was so out of my norm, I was really stepping outside of the box, both mentally, professionally, personally. I got braver about everything, braver about new situations, braver about problems I'd never seen before, braver about people and living with them and cohabitating in a 10-foot square box. That I think that the confidence was really the biggest impact of knowing myself a little bit better, but also being confident in what I wanted to do and how I was going to do it.
To wrap up our conversation today, I've got 3 questions for you. The first is, what do you wish you had known before you took your leap?
I think that the unexpected thing that came out of it is, I don't know that I knew at the time at how unique and unusual the opportunity was to take time off and be completely free to enjoy it. Because again, at the time I was single. When I quit my job, I didn't have a job. I only had my money to worry about. I didn't have a home or anything else to have to take care of while I was gone. And so I don't know that I knew then how unique that opportunity was and that it doesn't come easily. So I'm glad I took full advantage of it and didn't cut it short for reasons that weren't real. But, looking back on it, it's unusual that my family at this point will be able to find a year off that doesn't involve kids out of school or homeschooling and a husband that also has to sync his work and career life with that choice. And so being really appreciative of that, but also knowing what I know going forward, like we can find a way. There's a lot more to plan, again, coming up with my Excel spreadsheet, but it's possible. And then you could re-enter life again and it'll all be great. And if anything, you'll have changed and grown for it and the world will keep going.
What was the most unexpected thing that came of your leap?
I think the most unexpected thing is how much my life and perspective could change, but how I was almost the exact same person I was before I left at the core. I think there are things that I learned and did that grew who I was as a person. But at the end of the day, I'm still that planner. I'm still that very thoughtful and methodical person. But that had other parts of me that I could bring to light that might have been a little bit less obvious. Because now I think people are less surprised to know that I'm an adventurous person, whereas before people would have been shocked that I would have done an adventure like this.
For someone who's thinking of doing something similar, what one piece of advice would you offer?
I think I alluded to it before, but I think really trying to understand why you're doing it and know as much as you can what you want to get out of it. For me, I wanted to be able to answer the question, what I hope is different about my life and me when I come back. And so I think if I could get as much of that, or someone could get as much of that sort of laid out in your head, that helps you kind of figure out what the experience could be and should be for you. And then the other piece of practical advice was pack way less clothes than you think you'll need. Because you'll surprise yourself in not needing it, and then you won't have to carry it around.
Yeah, I had to jettison quite a bit of my things along the way. I have various articles of clothing in South America, I think. Well, Judy, thanks so much for sharing your adventure with us and your story. It's been great talking to you today.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's really been wonderful talking to you and sharing my story with everybody.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Leap Like Me. As usual, you can head over to lisahawashi.com for the notes from today's show. You can see photos of Judy's adventure. You can get some additional resources that she's provided. Also, she wanted to be sure to mention that if you have any questions and would like to reach out to her personally, you can do that via her LinkedIn profile. And that information is also included on the website. If you're working on your own leap, come on over to Facebook and join the Leap Like Me community. You can get some extra support there. Or feel free to reach out to me directly at lisahawashi.com or via Instagram or Facebook. Just send me a message. If you're enjoying the show, we would love it if you leave us a rating or review on iTunes. We're still collecting those, and it's super important to get your feedback and support in these early days of the show. That's it for this week's episode. I hope you have a great week.